All right. So let's see here. So we're going to talk about communicating results and visualizations. So we are going to basically focus on communicating the stats because we want to put these stats into visualizations. Typically, dashboards is our favorite way of doing that. And the key to creating a visualization, always remember the purpose. Make sure you pick the best chart. And then just because you pick it and you do it the first time doesn't work, at least in my experience, it never works the first time. So you want to refine your chart. And then we usually communicate via a written report. Most of the time, it's either an executive summary and then a brief. So the executive summary is usually 1 page. The brief could be 2 to 5. I usually like to stick to about 2. That usually seems to be the sweet spot. And then it doesn't count your visualizations, but that's okay. So data analytics are effective, but they are also as important and as effective as the communication and making the data understandable. That's the key. Hopefully, those visualizations that you do gets you the results that you need. So while you could be number crunching all day long, but then if you don't get the results that you need or communicate it to the right people, then we got problems, right? So we don't like that. We don't like those problems. So here you see data with the same statistics, but how you can interpret it all differently. So here you see that we have some quarterly data. We have only 11. So your N here is 11, right? And then your -1 is your degrees of freedom, right? And then here you see how all the different ways it could be interpreted. And so whichever one gives you the best. So out of all of these, which one would you probably pick to include in your report? On Zoom? What do we think? I'd probably go with the first one. More linear, hopefully easy to explain, and then I can describe it. Why would I not go with this one? How am I going to explain that, right? I'd have to explain this vertical line when I expect it to go the other way, right? So you just have to look at it. And that's why I say you need to refine it because you don't know where it's going to come out the first time. Why do we do all this fun stuff, right? Because if you write a lot of crap, people don't read it, right? So if you look at something, you're more likely to process it faster. You're more likely to remember it. And then especially in our case, we have a lot of complex information, right? We have big data. And because we have big data, we need data mining software, and then we have different data sets. We're combining them. And when we do all of that, then it's easier if we just put it into a visualization. I've had very good luck with visualizations, so I highly recommend them. And so here, it's basically what type of data is visualized and how are you explaining the results? So we have different kinds of charts, right? So if it's quantitative, which is where we mostly are, we try to do those in some type of format that works. Qualitative, we try to put the words. So think qualitative, we're trying to put words to pictures. And here in quantitative, we're putting numbers to dashboards, pretty much. That's how we do it. So definitely know what type of data you have. So for your test, I would note that you have qualitative data. It's nominal, ordinal, or proportionate, okay? So make a note of that. So if you have nominal data, that's pretty simple, right? Like hair color, eye color, If you have ordinal data, you're ranking them, right? So first, second, third, gold, silver, and bronze, because we're in the winter. Is the Winter Olympics still going on? Or are we done? I don't know. I have to look that up. And then proportionate is basically you make different categories, right? So it has to add up to 100%, but it's like male, female, things of that nature. Then with quantitative data, make a note of this. You have ratio data, interval data, discrete data, continuous data, and you have distributions. So this is a really important slide. I would make a note and make sure that you do study this. So obviously ratio data, there is an absence of something like cash, right? Interval data, it's like you might have temperatures. Discrete data, there are points right? And it's a finite point, right? You can only have one kid, one point for a basketball game. And then your continuous data, this could be, okay, I wish I would grow taller, height. And then your distributions is basically your descriptive statistics. So when you think of distributions, think of descriptive statistics. So your mean, your mode, your standard deviation, your quartiles, your min, your max, think of all of that. And then is your so there we could have declarative or exploratory visualizations, right? And so declarative is we're actually trying to present the financial results, or present the findings, or present the experiment, the findings of the experiment. Exploratory, we're trying to figure out something. We're trying to gain insights. So also make a note, because you will see this on your exam as well. So we want you to, you might be given a scenario, and then it'll ask you what type of visualization are we trying to convey here. So it would either be declarative or exploratory. And so once you know your data, you know why you want to create this visualization, then you got to find the right chart. So this, I would actually make sure you put this in your study guide, because it gives you the quadrants and it tells you. So typically, I would say we mostly stay right here for most of it, right? You might have some traditional ones here, at least from a like accounting analytics perspective. So we would do trends, we would do some sense, we would try to make sense of what our data is. We would look at maybe testing and analyzing the data, and then seeing if it's dynamic and interactive. These types of dashboards, dynamic and interactive, are the way we like to do them, because then we're good, right? You can just drill down, you can figure that out. So this is where we mostly stay on this side. Obviously charts, even though they could be static, but then we usually put those in our reports and presentations. The qualitative, I would say, sometimes you see marketing in this space and management. From a finance and accounting perspective, we might look at qualitative data for maybe reviews of customers to see what type of warranty expense we need to have, or what type of reserve we need to have. But from a more financial and data analytics perspective, we're just looking at a lot of the numbers. So here we go. For qualitative data, we start to look at, you could still, do some things. So here, I guess we're talking about different beers. Is that it? Yeah, I guess. Would this be beers? Pale, sweet, or types of things? I don't know. Whatever that is, I have no idea. And then the percentages that we're using. So you see, so out of these two charts, this one, probably if you put the percentages in each of these, it might be better. But I prefer like a bar. So it's just, and it's also what you're trying to convey. So if you're looking at this, I might speak to that. Well, look, we need to do more of Imperial Stout because we're at 27%. And how can we, and this is a, 25%. So these are probably our two best products. So how are we doing that? Here, it's the title is in. So if the percentage and the title would be in here, it might work. So you see how quickly, like just two simple changes can make the chart go like fabulously? Right. We would hope. Wait, I don't know who keeps doing that. So what type of chart is appropriate? Make a note of this, because it will ask you. So if you have proportionate data, but it is qualitative, then these are really good charts for that. Especially, I would say my favorites here are word clouds and probably heat maps. Not a fan of stacked bar charts though. And then if you're looking at quantitative data, this is where we live. So scatter plots, geographical maps. And then actually what I've seen more of is the maps, and then we add a heat map to that. So we overlay a heat map, which is kind of nice. But like line charts and mostly basket, scatter plots, those are where we lie. So I would make a note of this and make sure you commit this to memory, right? So if it's qualitative, I probably just know what the charts are for quantitative, and then most of the others fall into the qualitative bucket. So, because you will see questions on your exam for this. And then, so if you are a visual learner, they put it for you in a nice little graph here. So like I said, word clouds is probably where I'm at, heat maps. So whichever way helps you to remember it. And then you have your line, you have your scatter plot where you're looking at all that bit, your maps in, and your box and whisper. So probably remember this because then all the others will be qualitative. So I would say that, make a note that you have a quantitative information. So you would do box and whisper, scatter plot, line charts, that's easy, and then filled maps. And that you'll get that on your test. So how does this chart illustrate bias? Well, here you see we have 0.7 and 0.6. Wouldn't you expect the 0.6 to be like right here? So obviously if you're, and look at that. So like the scales aren't right. And once you start doing that, then you can really distort the information. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that. Some of like in the summers, I usually am a fractional CFO, actually one summer I got to be, I think it was like a temporary CFO, they called me. I came into an organization in New York and I worked for them for the summer and I fixed their charts and I fixed their dashboards because that's what they needed. And so what you expect to see is something like so this is not what we want, right? Because we see the scale is off. But now you see here, this looks more like what we expect to see, right? So we want to be careful of the scale. You always want to ensure that you're trying to present it and not skew it. And then if you're presenting it like what the increase is, then we're revising our estimate. That's okay. You could do that, right? So that's how we kind of show. So you want to show things in a way that hopefully will support your position. So when you're looking at this, it's trying to tell you about whose computer is attacked more. And here you see, here you see these items, and then how does that, I don't see any red in here, right? So do they even work? Like, how can you do this? So, and this is, does that really give you any perspective? Maybe if you're doing it in some type of better format, this is kind of like all over the place and you're not going to convey anything. But now if I show you, look at Azul, now this looks pretty good, right? So maybe so if I'm an IT person, I would probably ignore this, but or maybe just focus right here, right? Because if they're attacking my computers on my network, that's a problem. So, and look how crazy it is here, and you probably didn't even see the number 8 anywhere, right? Like, was hard to find, right? And here you just see it completely. So this is just to illustrate the ways in which if you're not putting the information in the way that it can be used, and then now you're just categorically putting it based on assistant researcher and administrators. So the assistants are my problem group, So let me see. And then I might now look at their logs and figure out, okay, why are they getting attacked? Where are they going? What websites are they going on? And so I'm not a fan of the stacked bar charts because then you don't really see. So my preference is always, I think, and I've had very good luck with more bar charts, but not stacked bar charts, especially to convey more complex information. That's just like my experience. So, and now we're to the refining. So you've got to improve your charts, right? When it comes down to it, make sure, number 1, you want to make sure you have the appropriate scale. Number 2, you're using colors as best as possible. So when you're looking at scale, you want to know, okay, what's my data that I'm showing? Do I have outliers, and am I going to show them? Most of the time, I would say no. The baseline is usually 0, but sometimes if you have a large scale, then maybe that's not, you could put it in the middle. And then what type of information are you trying to convey? So when you do that, when you think of colors, what do the colors mean? We usually try to stick to red, yellow, green, right? And especially if we're in the red, we don't like that in accounting. That kills us. But we want to make sure if it's a positive outcome, I probably wouldn't portray it in red, right? I would portray it in green or maybe blue. So just make sure. And then, like I said, we want to be careful of the color blind because I didn't realize this when I started creating all these charts, how many people really can't tell if it's pink or red or what color it is. So who knows? All right. So words, if we get stuck with words, right? I think it's harder to write a succinct memo than it is to write, and it very short, right? So I think it's easier to write long pages because you're just like babbling on. So to get to the point and be succinct, that's why I said an executive summary. So you should be able to give me in 2 to 4 paragraphs everything. Preferably 1 paragraph, but So that's the key. That's the hard part. So always keep in mind, it's very easy to write a lot of bigger words than it is smaller words. So we want to, or a lot of information instead of not. So the key, our textbook talks all about the impact model, right? IMPCT. So our impact model, right? First, we want to explain what we did, right? Why we researched it and why I'm giving you this information, the purpose. Then I want to tell you the issues, especially you don't go too much into the extract, transform, and load process, but you do want to say the data that you had, maybe the scope, how many years. Then you want to give an overview of what, if you're doing like a time series, the model that you use, the assumptions in that model. And then typically with the assumptions, then you cover the limitations. Then you always want to try to give some type of explanation why you chose your visualization. So most of the time, what I would say is this was the cleanest and most succinct way of showing you the severity of the issue of our decline in revenues, for example, or our overspending in employee salaries. And then just because you tell them something, and then hopefully you make something stand out. So in that case, with the revenues, if we went down 10%, that would be a precipitous drop, and then show the impact of how that decrease in revenue can impact all of the financials. And then you discuss, and hopefully what you do is you explain what to do next. So, and like I said before, consider your audience and your tone. Sometimes I came off as too technical and too numbers driven. So, and then I also did give, like, the devil is in the details, or so they say. And I did that too. So be careful with that. And again, choosing the right chart, maybe putting the right information on the chart and the color, and ensuring it's titled, like I mentioned, maybe on those pie charts, adding what it is and the percentage. Try to play around with all of that. And don't think you're done. It's not a one and done, unfortunately. Any type of business reports that I've done, until the financials are like released, they were changing, So, and then also it's kind of nice if somebody else would review it. I always like to mention Dr. Tickell is an excellent editor. So any paper that I write, Dr. Tickell always reads it for me and gives me like such a great like overview, and he tells a good story. So find people like that can help you. In business, we usually pay for editors, so that's kind of nice too, if you don't want to. So you are pretty much all set with your visualizations here. And this is a great summary. So I would probably also take these slides from your summary and put those into your study guide. That would help you, because it pretty much, because your exam is just coming from the test bank. I purposely chose mostly easy to medium questions, but these exact, like, the summaries is a good item. And then I did give you, for the study guides, the 2 that I gave you, I tried to give you an outline. So what I did is I put the PowerPoint and some of the chapters, because it didn't let me print all of it. So I've tried to put some of the PDFs of the chapter into Notebook LM, and I asked it to create a report to give me an outline with the main points. So that's how I did your study guides. And so you could do the same. Take your PowerPoint and then maybe take the study guide that I gave you, or anything that you want to scan from the book, pop that into Notebook LM, and that should hopefully get you to what you need. I think we're done. Look at that. You made it. Let me stop